Welcome to another episode of Teach the Geek interviews. My name is Neil Thompson, the founder of Teach the Geek. It's an online platform for science and engineering professionals. The first offering of the platform is a public speaking course called Teach the Geek to Speak. To learn more about it, you can go to teachthegeek.com. Again, that's teachthegeek.com. Today, my guest is Mel Butcher. She is a civil engineer, but she actually got her first degree in French and French literature, French language and literature, which I'm pretty interested to learn more about. In addition to being an engineer, she's also a podcaster. The podcast that she has is called Empowering Women, and she interviews women from various industries to learn their stories and their secrets to success. And I actually learned about Mel from her videos on LinkedIn, where she offers some great advice to young engineers. So I'm really interested to learn more about her interest in engineering and how she went from French to civil engineering, her podcast, of course, and then her motivation for doing her videos on LinkedIn. Welcome to Teach the Geek interviews, Mel.
Thank you, Neil, so much for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So I mentioned in the intro that you got a degree in French, but then you went back to school and got a degree in civil engineering. I don't really see the link between French and civil engineering, so I'm really interested to learn more about what prompted that decision.
Sure, I get that a lot. So I think this ties well into just the question or idea of why does someone get interested in engineering? And as you mentioned, I podcast, so I've interviewed quite a few engineers over the years, and it's interesting that a lot of people I've interviewed don't make the connection between how having a parent as an engineer can really influence their career path, whether they go into engineering or some other form of science. But anyway, that I didn't have that experience, so that plays a lot into what happened in my path. So I grew up in a small town in Texas. There were a lot of sort of blue collar folks in that town, and the people in my family and the people that I had access to by their network were not in any kind of field like engineering. There's a lot of military in my family. Most of the women in my family were teachers. And I grew up in such a small town that I didn't really see business people. The only businesses that I saw growing up were really retail businesses. So when you think about something like consulting or other big businesses that really drive a lot of other parts of the economy, I didn't really have line of sight to those, and certainly I didn't have role models in those types of fields. So when I went to school the first time, I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't really have guidance or any help, and so I kind of fell into the path that I think a lot of people do, where I took all of my basics and then I had to pick a major, and I still just couldn't do it. But after studying abroad, I had lots of language hours, and so I just finished a language degree because I didn't know what else to do. So after I finished that, I worked in emergency management for the government for several years. And eventually I decided that I wanted to go back to school for something that applied math and science. And still, I didn't really know any engineers, but I went to the Occupational Outlook handbook and I looked for jobs that were applied math and science and that had like a pretty good career trajectory or like anticipated growth. And so that's how I came to engineering, was looking through the Occupational Outlook handbook and then deciding to go back to school.
Oh, okay. Well, that is a pretty interesting story. But it made me think about what you said about having a parent that was an engineer in STEM themselves being some sort of, I guess, motivation or just a factor at least in kids going into engineering themselves. Even my own personal story, I became an engineer because my father told me to.
Yeah.
He wasn't an engineer himself, but I guess he saw I was good at math and science, and he thought that maybe engineering was a stable job. So that's why he insisted that I do it. And, for the longest while, I used to lie about the reason I went into engineering because I thought the reason was kind of lame. But now as I get older, I don't really care. I mean, luckily it worked out. This whole engineering thing, and luckily it worked out. It worked out for you as well. But I know you studied civil engineering specifically. Is there a reason you picked civil?
Um, Really lack of knowledge. So the university that I went to didn't have an environmental specific undergraduate program. And at the time I thought that, with the label environmental, that's what I would want to do because, hey, I want to help make things better. I want to ensure that I'm helping protect the environment. But what I learned as I was going through school for engineering, and this is a message for anyone out there who's young and considering engineering as a major, what I learned is that you can really do good things for the world and the environment in any discipline of engineering. You really can. And so I think if I could go back and do it again with that knowledge, I might have picked a different major just because there's so many different things that you can do that are environmentally helpful in different disciplines. So to wrap that question up, the civil engineering department at USF, University of South Florida in Tampa, their environmental sort of focus area fell under mostly civil engineering. So that's why I ended up in civil.
Okay. And I also noticed from just doing a bit of research on you, not only do you have a bachelor's in French and a bachelor's in civil engineering, then you also have a master's. So you must be a glutton for punishment. What was the reason to go and get a master's too?
Well, I did it concurrently with my bachelor's degree. So I went through an accelerated program where I was kind of working on both at the same time. So some of the programs like that, I think what they'll do is they'll count like one or two classes as overlap. So maybe like one or two senior classes can be also counted as graduate classes. So that's why I did that. It was just convenient to do both at the same time.
Oh, okay. And for the job that you have currently, what do you like the most about it?
Sure. Thank you for that question. So I work for a company called Carollo Engineers, and that's spelled like the car Corolla, except instead of the A at the end, it's got an O. So Carollo Engineers. And Carollo is a water and wastewater only focused consultancy in the US. So we're about 1,200 people strong all across the United States. And I joined their private sector team. So a lot of the work that Carollo does is in the municipal market. So municipal drinking water and wastewater, some stormwater too. And then I joined the private sector group, which focuses on water and wastewater in the industrial setting. So places like manufacturing or oil and gas, things like that. So I am helping the team grow in different ways. So we are growing a lot. We've got a lot going on, a lot of work in the tech space. Incidentally, we're doing things for data centers and for microchip manufacturing. And so, yeah, that's the group that I work in. So we design and oversee the building of projects in those types of places. So that could be high purity water systems on the front end, or it could be the wastewater treatment systems on the back end.
Okay. And what do you like the most about the job so far?
Oh, yes. So what I like most about the job is really the people. Carollo does such an excellent job of making the workplace welcoming, and the team members are really collaborative in a way that I haven't experienced before. So it's just a special place and a special team that they've really created something that I think is hard to do. It's especially hard to do as companies get bigger and bigger, but Carollo Engineers overall seems to have done a really good job with that. So I work with great people that want to help one another, you know?
What do you dislike about the job?
What do I dislike? Well, I'd say it's more specific to consulting in general. There's a lot of ups and downs in consulting. And particularly when you think about something like the private sector, the work can be up and down contingent with the economy. So right now, we're recording this during the pandemic, and because of not just the pandemic, but things that were happening in the previous months on a global scale, oil and gas is like not moving right now. So if you what I'm trying to say is, if you get yourself in a position in consulting where you're really where your work is really contingent on one sector like oil and gas or mining, and that sector tanks, suddenly you're out of work, or your work is on pause for a really long time. So I think that that's sort of a general stressor in any kind of consulting that somebody has to consider when they go down that path. But you find other things to work on and other places to focus expertise.
Yeah, for sure. So with the current job that you have now in relation to the job that you've had previously, what have you learned from those previous jobs that prepared you for the job that you currently have?
That's a great question. I still feel like I'm quite new to Carollo and my path within Carollo. Um, but I think one thing in general I'd like to share that I've learned just working in these different spaces is that there are benefits and negatives to any size company. I feel like in some conversations people get this notion that like it's best to only work for a small company or a mid-sized company or a large company. And I suppose some people may have personal preferences, but my experience has been going from quite a large company now to a mid-sized company, I guess you'd say, that there's really positives to both. And uh, I'd be happy to talk about that more with somebody if they're curious sometime. So people are welcome to reach out to me if they want to discuss that.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, I think you're right about that. The smaller companies, maybe you have the opportunity to do more stuff because there's fewer people, so you get to wear more hats.
Mm-hmm.
With the bigger companies, you have access to probably more, like, bigger projects, so you get access to even doing more things I guess in that sense. So yeah, you're right. There are definitely trade-offs and benefits to both places. But hopefully, you get paid pretty good either, right?
Right. I mean, I think most engineers do pretty well. Yeah. The other thing I'll say about big companies is that they've usually got some resources for outside initiatives that maybe small companies don't always have. So if you're doing something that's externally facing, that could benefit your professional development, I think a lot of times a big company might have a pool of resources for something like that a quite small company might not be able to have, just because they're operating at a smaller scale.
Yeah, for sure. And so when it comes to speaking, what topics do you enjoy speaking on?
Uh, I love that question. So I was thinking about that, and I find that a lot of the things that I enjoy talking about are also the things I enjoy reading about. So one of my favorite things that I have gotten to speak on at a conference so far is emotional intelligence for leaders. So I've definitely done plenty of presentations that are more on the work side related to industrial water risk or return on investment for conservation projects in the industrial setting. But I really enjoy the other side, what many people might call soft skills, but what Seth Godin calls real skills. I enjoy the opportunity to speak about those, learn about those, and collaborate with other folks who want to improve on something like that, whether it's emotional intelligence or public speaking.
Yeah, you know what? And I think especially when it comes to engineers, we really could use some help in that area because a lot of times we're technically proficient, but that whole people skills thing, I think it missed us. So it's definitely something that we can stand to work on. I mentioned also in the intro that you have a podcast. What was your motivation to host such a podcast?
Well, thank you for asking. So I host a show called the Empowering Women Podcast, And I actually produce it for an organization called Empowering Women in Industry. And so this is kind of funny. So I had produced a podcast before on my own that was sort of a failure, and I really did it just to learn how to podcast. I wanted to learn the whole production process and to just see if I enjoyed it and that sort of thing. So I really approached it from a learning perspective, and it didn't quite work out how I wanted, which was totally fine. And so I retired that podcast. But the woman who leads Empowering Women in Industry, her name's Charlie, she came across my profile and my content, and they were looking for help to start a podcast. And I agreed to help them, and I gave them all kinds of advice. And through those conversations, they eventually ended up asking me if I would produce it for them. And so I agreed. So the organization is focused on helping women in their career paths, like whatever their career ambition is. The organization wants to support women in that ambition. So the podcast helps raise awareness about the organization, but it's mostly intended as a resource. So we want to highlight these women leaders that are in various types of fields. Often it's a STEM field, but not always. And just showcase the good work that they've done. And then also as an interviewer, I work to draw advice out of them. So I'm trying to get them to share their best lessons learned and advice for other women who are ambitious and looking to grow in their careers.
Interesting. What lessons did you learn from your first podcast that you bring to the second one?
Oh, gosh. Well, I think a big thing that I learned is that interviewing is a skill that you can really develop over time. And so, gosh, I'm sure you've found this too, there's such a wide spectrum in guests and how they communicate. And so, I interviewed some people who I barely had to say anything, and they would just kind of steam all this stuff they wanted to say. And then I had a couple of guests where it was like I had to crowbar, draw information out of them.
Jeez, man.
So I feel like that was it was a lot of learning. And I think that over time I've gotten better at interviewing and guiding the path of the conversation. So I love it. I really love doing that. I love interviewing people, and I love producing the shows.
Yeah, you know what? I'm laughing because what you're saying, it definitely resonates with me. I mean, some of the interviews, I think one in particular, the guy he just went. And I don't even think he even listened to the question I asked. He just spoke about whatever he wanted to speak about. And I remember, these things typically go 30 minutes. I remember it's like 20 minutes in, this guy was still like on the second question maybe I had asked. Or something like that. And I was thinking, when is this over? I need to end this now. I hate this dude. Why is he on here?
Well, I'll tell you, I ended up, based on that experience, I have a disclaimer now. Like, I have a disclaimer in my little thing that I send to interviewees. Basically, if this interview does not meet our quality standards for any reason, we will not publish this show. So
has that come up yet? Have you not published something?
It hasn't.
Well, there's my answer there.
Yeah. It hasn't happened recently, but I have to. I feel like it's really important for the listeners, right? Because my biggest goal is to make sure I'm making content for them that is helpful, right?
That's funny. So, I mentioned also, I learned about you from your LinkedIn videos of, offering advice to young engineers. What prompted you to make those videos?
Well, so a couple things. After I graduated, I would go back to USF. This is when I still lived in Tampa. I live in Wisconsin now, so I'm quite far away. But when I still lived in Tampa, I would go to USF and I would give talks to the local ASCE group or the student chapter of Society of Women Engineers. And some of the things that I talk about in these LinkedIn videos are things that I would talk about there. It would be advice around the job hunt and networking and resumes and things like that. And so what prompted me to turn them into videos is I kept receiving on LinkedIn these messages from young professionals that, you know, bless them, they're doing the best they know how to do to network. And I feel for them, you know, we all have to learn how to be good communicators, but some of the messages are just so not effective that I was hoping I could make something to not just tell them how to do it better, but to explain the thought process behind, like, you need to develop a relationship, a real relationship with someone that's not transactional before you make an ask of them. And so that's why that's what prompted those initial videos.
Oh man, you know, it's so true. On LinkedIn, you get these messages or these LinkedIn, you know, invites, and you accept it, and they contact you like, "You got a job? You can connect me with the hiring manager." It's like, who the hell are you? Like, you wouldn't do this in real life. I mean, if you did, it would be super awkward. But for some reason, online, people forget that it's awkward there too. It makes no sense there too. But yeah, you're absolutely right. That happens a lot. And
Yeah.
and frankly, especially now when people are losing their jobs and people are getting furloughed, I think it's happening even more. People are kind of in this desperate type of space and a desperate type of state. And so they're just reaching out and just, you know, throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks right now. But I mean, it doesn't work in a pandemic. It doesn't work, you know, outside of a pandemic. It won't work in a pandemic either. I mean,
right. And I mean, I hear what you're saying, and it is such a difficult time right now, and it can be really easy when you're in what feels like a very desperate situation to kind of fall down the rabbit hole and do, like you just said, try to like throw all these things out there and see what sticks, and, you know, put in 100 applications into the black box of a corporate application process or whatever. But I think my message that I'm trying to get through there is that if you take what might seem like a slower approach with fewer people and really have some narrower targets as far as companies and individuals that you want to have a relationship with, and then take the time to build those relationships with them, I think the outcome is likely to be a lot better than if you're just, you know, pounding out messages and applications for a job. So I feel for people that are in that situation. I totally understand the anxiety. So hopefully what I'm producing out there can help some people kind of get to a better space and hopefully find a job that's better for them than if they're just, you know, doing random applications.
Yeah, absolutely. When it comes to public speaking, has that been something you've always been good at? And if not, what have you done to get better at it?
Oh gosh. I think there's few people who are born good at public speaking. So it's not a sexy answer. I mean, I practiced. A long time ago, I joined a Toastmasters club. Podcasting has also helped quite a bit. Going through the process of interviewing someone, and then when I edit their content, I really think through, you know, what worked well as I'm listening to this and what doesn't work well. And I try to take those lessons and incorporate them into opportunities when I get to speak. So I think it's really just about practice. So anybody who wants to get better at public speaking, I think you can create opportunities to practice that are not just in front of big crowds, but doing practice leading up to those events. I think you can ask friends to let you practice in front of them when you've got something coming up. Tap into the professional organizations that you're involved with. You can find people there, and, you know, if you've got a big presentation coming up, ask if you can gather a few people from your organization and give that presentation in advance and practice it with them, and then get their feedback and incorporate that into your work before going to the big event, right? So yeah, practice makes perfect, and I still have plenty to learn and a long way to go on that front.
I appreciate the fact that you're a practice nerd, Mel, because I have a friend and he makes fun of me because I'm a big fan of practicing as well. And I notice, you know, a lot of the times when he does his presentations, he doesn't practice them at all. He just goes up there and wings it. And frankly, it shows. Do you have a process when it comes to putting your presentations together? And if so, what is it?
Oh, good question.
I ask good questions, you know.
Yeah. So, well, I'll take my most recent presentation as an example. So basically, I make an outline of the important points that I want to hit and the order that I want to go in. And then I will write some longer narrative, and I'll create slides based on the outline. And I like to go really visual heavy in slides. I don't like to put a lot of words in a slide deck because from everything I've read, people just can't pay attention to both words on slides and you speaking. So I like to just go for big visuals, like one big visual on each slide that corresponds with the topic of what I'll be talking about in that moment. So I think that's my overall sort of process.
I'm a big fan also of using visuals as opposed to a lot of text on slides. I fully agree with you that it's really difficult to read slides and also listen to people. So essentially, when you have just visuals, you're eliminating that choice of reading the slides. So now either they're going to listen to you or they're going to ignore you. So I'm also, and hopefully they don't ignore you. So yeah, please go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think we see that in TED Talks, right? Like some of the best talks we've ever listened to, you can see it in those recordings.
Yeah, absolutely. I fully agree with you on that point. And I think a lot of times, especially us as engineers, we'll cram a whole bunch of text onto them slides, and we'll read the damn slides. We won't even look at people. We'll read the slides, and then we'll get off the stage as quickly as possible. But essentially, at that point, it's public reading, not public speaking. So limit the amount of words on the slide. Do you ever get nervous when it comes to public speaking? And if so, what do you do to quell your nerves?
Sure. I get nervous. I think my my tactic, I guess, is deep breathing and trying to use my breathing to bring myself into the moment. And then what I like to focus on is the impact that I want to have. So maybe the impact is that I want to get 2 or 3 main points across to my audience. So I will think about that. I'll visualize how I want to get those messages across, and I'll think about, I'll visualize the audience receiving those messages and being able to do something positive with that. So those are the kinds of things that I like to think about, because then, having the opportunity to public speak isn't about me as much as it is about the audience and me providing something to them that is helpful in some way.
Yeah, I fully agree. You've offered some great tips to people when it comes to getting better at public speaking. I wrote down a few: practicing, deep breathing, using visuals as opposed to a whole lot of text on slides, having 3 main points so people aren't overloaded with information, and then really gearing your presentation towards your audience as opposed to what you want. Are there any other tips that you can think of that would help people in becoming more effective in public speaking?
Well, nobody's ever asked me that. I think what I would encourage people to do is to focus on helping the audience. And when you've got your main points in mind, finding a way with your words and your visuals to drive that point several times. There's an effective way to use repetition. And if you're really trying to drive something home, you want to find a good way to incorporate that. So there's lots of different ways that you could do that, but I'll give one example. when I would go speak to students, I would pick out 3 points of things that I would kind of want to drive home. And I would actually set up a sort of quiz type thing almost with a prize. So I'd give them a card at the beginning of class and I'd say, okay, when we get to a slide where there's a star, there's a main point on there that I really want you to remember. And so I want you to write it down. You're going to see 3 stars. So write down the main point of that slide on your card and we'll come back to it at the end. So we would go through, and then at the end, I'd have a prize for each star. So I was trying to incentivize them to like really listen to some of those points. And, you know, I'd try to give away fun little things associated with that.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. What was the prize?
You know, random stuff like Starbucks gift cards or like writing journals or, you know, little tokens.
Yeah, yeah. I'm getting a Starbucks gift card. Yeah, I'm definitely listening for sure. Well, this has been really great, Mel. Thanks again for taking time to speak with me. How can people get in touch with you?
People can find me at meltheengineer.com. So you can go to meltheengineer.com and message me through there. You can also find links to my social media accounts. And yeah, I'd love to hear from you. And if you are a young engineer looking for some advice on your job search, definitely follow me on LinkedIn. And you can find a link to my LinkedIn on meltheengineer.com as well. And thank you so much for having me, Neil. This was fun.
Wonderful. Well, everybody, that marks the end of another episode of Teach the Geek interviews. My name is Neil Thompson, founder of Teach the Geek. It's an online platform for science and engineering professionals. I'm using Mel's advice right now with the repetition. And the course that is the first course on the platform is a public speaking course called Teach the Geek to Speak. To learn more about it, you can go to teachthegeek.com. Again, that's teachthegeek.com. Until next time, take care and stay safe. Thanks, Mel.
Thanks, Neil.